On Press Perspective today, we touch upon all things K yet again with the focus on literature, video games and of course, music. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Thursday, April 2nd. Here in Seoul, I'm Min Sun-hee. Nobel laureate Han Kang won a National Book Critics Circle Award for fiction for her novel We Do Not Part, which delves into the traumatic aftermath of the massacre of people in the southern Korean island of Jeju in the 1940s. For more on this, our freelance reporter David Lee here in the studio. David, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with us. Colin, it's lovely to have you here.
Glad to be here.
David, let's start off with the recent acknowledgement that Han Kang received from critics in the U.S.
Yes, so her book, We Do Not Part, won the National Book Critics Circle Award in the U.S., which awards the best English language book of the year. It was actually written back in 2021, but it was translated into English at the start of last year, and that's why she was eligible for the award this year. And as you mentioned in the beginning, it's based on the devastating aftermath of the Jeju April 3rd uprising and massacre in the late 1940s, where thousands of people were killed, reportedly. And this book is actually the third translated novel to win in the history of the National Book Critics Circle Award. And the book is also praised in many other countries like France and Sweden, which it was also translated in their respective languages. And it's known to have contributed to Han Kang's, as we all know, her incredible Nobel Prize win in 2024, where her book Human Acts, which also delves into a painful history of South Korea, in this case, the raw devastation of the Gwangju uprising. But this isn't her first time that she's really become the center of the literature community in the world. Back in 2016, her book, The Vegetarian, was the first Korean novel to win the International Booker Prize. This is not new territory for her, and just her works continue to attract global audiences, and the critics have continued to notice her work.
You're right indeed. Colin, what's your take, I wonder, on the journey beyond borders of South Korean literature in recent years?
Well, it's a journey I've been following pretty much since the beginning, since the popularity of Korean literature abroad around the world only really goes back about 15 years. You can't find many high-profile examples, or any before that. One of the earliest is Shin Kyung-suk, who had the novel translated as Please Look After Mom. About 2011, it got the nod from Oprah Winfrey, the big talk show host, and it won the Man Asian Literary Prize. A few years later, Han Kang's The Vegetarian won the Booker, and so we have these particular marks on the timeline, others as well, but it can look like, if you zoom out, that Korean literature has just been going from strength to strength and gaining popularity, sweeping the world. But when you zoom in, it's been in a bit more fits and starts than it might seem. It's been not as easy a trajectory to project or even chart as it might seem, because, there are many reasons, and one of them being that Korean literature is in many ways an unlikely candidate to become a global literature, because if you read Korean novels, for obvious reasons, and you can tell right away, they assume the audience is Korean. They assume the reader is Korean, has had specific experiences, and comes with specific knowledge. So a lot of early translated Korean literature was full of footnotes, or it got awkwardly explanatory because there was just too much a foreign reader wouldn't know. Now, since then, of course, more writers have been consciously writing for a global or potentially global audience in hopes of translation, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. But as we've seen in some of the high-profile successes, as I say, Shin Kyung-suk, Please Look After Mom, or The Vegetarian, these were also somewhat controversial translations, despite or because of their success, because you could say that what was done to them in translation was more than translating. There was something else brought to them by the translator that made them more appealing to an English language audience specifically. And so, this is a debate many translators get into, especially in the academy. What's translation? How much is going too far? You know, how faithful do you have to be? How much can you change the style? Every translator has his or her own method, but I think for Korean literature, the most successful books have also been sometimes the more adapted than translated, I will say, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all. You know, I often think, and I study translation here myself in Korea, I often think that when you're translating, you are creating something new. You're not simply replicating the original text, and you can't hope to do it, especially in a language like Korean. You know, there was a piece in the New Yorker years ago on the Literature Translation Institute of Korea, where I studied, and that has been seen as the main body lobbying for a Nobel Prize for a Korean writer, which eventually was received by Han Kang, as David said. And there was a fan of Korean literature interviewed for this piece who said something like, you know, I think the reason why Korea hasn't won a Nobel Prize yet, at that time, Han Kang's prize had not been won, it's because Korean is too subtle and too distinctive a language to be appreciated in translation. Really, first, the Swedish Academy has to learn Korean. Then Han Kang, obviously didn't say Han Kang, then the prize will be won by a Korean writer. And you know, that didn't have to happen, but I do think that sentiment is not without its truth. I think for a full appreciation of Korean literature, you do have to go to the original. But starting with the translation is not a bad thing at all.
Right, some food for thought right there. David, along with K-literature and of course K-pop, K-games were recently highlighted by the New York Times. Could you tell us a bit more about this? Yeah, so
South Korea is huge on gaming culture. You know, South Korea, it's the fourth largest gaming market in the world, behind countries like the US and China and Japan. It's estimated to be $14.6 billion. And you know, the country has the best pro gamers in the world. If you look back to their StarCraft League back in the early 2000s, you know, there were all of the top tier players were from South Korea. If you look at today's League of Legends League, you know, players like Faker, all of the top teams, top players are from South Korea. And you know, if you just come to Seoul, you can see the magnitude of the gaming industry and the culture here. You see PC bangs or internet cafes in every corner of Seoul. But the key thing here is that the titles of the games here that are popular, like StarCraft and League of Legends, the majority of them are developed in foreign countries, especially the United States. So it was only with PUBG Battleground that a Korean game really made headlines overseas as well, back in 2017. But recently, in recent years, Korean games like Stellar Blade and Lies of P have gained international fame. And this is significant because these games are not just for computer games, but they're also developed for console systems such as PlayStation or Xbox or Nintendo. And the reason that this is important is because the non-mobile game industry is nearly split evenly between computer games and console systems. And you know, these console systems sometimes, most of the times they require much more intricate development. So the price tags for developing these games are much more higher, and yeah, it just kind of tells how much you know, the company is capable of developing these very top-tier games. And you know, the government has also jumped into this bandwagon. You know, President Lee Jae-myung, he announced that the game industry is a truly authentic export for South Korea. It really lines up with his agenda of making South Korea a top-tier soft power giant in the world. So the gaming initiatives in the country are set to receive $50 million from the government in the next few years. And the New York Times article also pointed out that the future strategy for these Korean games, if they want to continue their success, maybe they could take hints from the success of, you know, K-pop and K-dramas, where you know, these sectors, they really involve the stylized takes of modern Korean culture and they took those themes and they incorporated it into their music, into their fashion. So yeah, let's see what other games, Korean games, come out in the next few years.
Right, indeed. Well, the current administration's support for the gaming industry itself and for games in general is quite remarkable, Colin, I'm sure you'd agree, especially if you consider that about a decade ago, previous administrations had even been considering the idea of linking gaming to addiction. Right. Do you believe the public here is still regards gaming with a bit of caution, given fears about potential addiction?
Right. If you look at the history of gaming in Korea or the Korean gaming industry, you see these periods of suspicion and even panic every so often. Even early on in the early 80s, when video arcades started popping up in Korea, kids were hanging out at them and they weren't cleanly separated from gambling establishments. So before those two were extracted from each other, there was a lot of moral panic here about arcades themselves. Later on, the turn of the 90s, you had a lot of suspicion about the physiological effects of games, and there were glasses on the market you could put. Allegedly, they would stop you from having seizures, but of course the rumor was only Japanese games cause seizures. So if you're playing those, wear the glasses, but don't be playing Japanese games, that whole thing. And then with the technology developing, you had PC bang, as David mentioned. There's fears of kids hanging out too much there and getting corrupted, playing StarCraft or what have you, if they don't turn into pro gaming athletes, that is. Now, with addiction, I think it's begun to cross cultural boundaries in many ways, because technology has made everything more addictive. It's not just games. Food has become more addictive. Gambling has become more addictive, more pervasive in the US especially. Social media, need I say more? And so as everything grows more addictive, you do see some countries not necessarily turning games or other forms of technology into controlled substances, but sometimes starting to classify them as official public health threats. So you might see more of that here as well. I mean, Korea's usually ahead in thinking about technology for good or ill, sometimes getting too anxious about technology, sometimes adopting too fast. But I think if any country will sort of go through early trial and error about how to handle this increasing form of addiction, it will be Korea. And indeed, I think it was 10 years ago, there was a ban on gaming at night, which wasn't very successful. But again, it's, policies get tried out, techniques get tried out. So there will be some innovation happening here, I'm sure, one way or the other.
Right. Moving forward, David, let's now turn to BTS's latest achievements with its new album, Arirang, which I believe is topping charts in the US and over in the UK.
Yes, and those are the two biggest music charts in the world. So first of all, it's the title song of the album, Swim, topped the Billboard Hot 100. And its 10th studio album, Arirang, topped the Billboard 200 charts, which means that BTS currently has the #1 song and the #1 album in the United States, which is, the biggest music market in the world. And as you mentioned, it also topped the second biggest music market in the world in the UK by topping the UK official albums chart. And also, its title song, Swim, made it the first time that the group topped the UK singles chart as well, which is pretty significant. And the album sales are becoming a global phenomenon. It's topped charts in Australia, Germany, Japan. Hybe just announced that it sold 4.16 million album copies within the first week of its release. But just a few weeks ago, the narrative was a little bit different because there was a little bit of the disappointment in the BTS's comeback stage in Gangwon Square, where authorities and the label Hybe, they were expecting around 260,000 people to congregate near the square, but according to the Seoul city officials, only about 48,000 gathered during the performance. Hybe did report that closer to 144,000 attended, but the media, they really tied into the fact that the label's shares fell 14.5%. They really tied that with the disappointing turnout for the comeback stage. And it made it worse with local businesses also reporting losses. They were expecting more business profits from the visitors and just the hype of the event. But again, the results of the charts, they, I think, make HYBE happy again, and it's really good news for them. Also, Netflix, they announced that the live stream drew 18.4 million viewers worldwide, entering the top 10 charts in over 80 countries. So yeah, there's kind of a balancing act there. So, and we also can't forget that BTS is about to start their world tour in a week's time actually. The first concert will start in Goyang on Thursday. And the media, they repeatedly compared it to Taylor Swift's Eras Tour, which is really the benchmark of world tours. It was the first to break the threshold of $2 billion in revenue from the tour. And yeah, so as BTS is set to perform in over 80 shows across 23 countries, yeah, I think the world really witnessed the comeback of the biggest boy band in the group, the biggest music group in the world.
Right, and as you mentioned, David, its album Arirang, it's doing remarkably well on charts in the US and in the UK. Colin, now here's a difficult question for you. How do you respond to the debate about cultural identity with regard to BTS's latest album Arirang?
Yes, the album has been well reviewed in the Western press overall. If you just line up all the reviews together, it's been almost entirely positive. And even the less positive reviews, they're not necessarily panning it, but they do have certain objections. There have been some critics willing to make objections to the way the BTS sound has evolved, and in doing so, they risk the wrath and the ire of BTS's large army, so-called, of fans, because they always lash out on social media and elsewhere whenever something insufficiently positive is written about BTS. So it's telling that you do see some critics in the English language media at least daring to do that. And when they have lodged criticisms of Arirang, they tend to frame them in terms of a promise of Koreanness not being fully delivered, in that when you name an album Arirang, you set certain expectations, shall we say. This is an album named after the folk song that is the unofficial anthem of the Korean people. It is also the namesake of this very network. And that signals a certain intent, I don't know if I would say nationalist intent, but certainly an intent to express a Korean identity through the music. And then when you listen to the music, or when some of these critics have listened to it, to them, I think it sounds very much like it could have been made anywhere. Even if they like it, some have described the sound as having a certain placelessness. And if you look at the roster of contributors to the album, you can kind of see why. Because, of course, the members of BTS are all there. They're Korean, naturally. But then there's a list a mile long of writers and producers, almost to a single one, Westerners, and almost all of them American. And the album was recorded almost entirely in Los Angeles as well, as far as I understand it. So given these factors, one does wonder, to what extent can we even call this a Korean album? And you listen to it, and the first thing you hear is this blast of English. And through the whole album, it's mostly sung in English. And the members themselves, there's a documentary about the making of this album, which is also on Netflix, I believe. And you can see one of the members just say, why is there so much English on this album? I mean, he's one of the guys in BTS himself wondering, like, what's going on here? Or there's another scene where they're showing sort of visible discomfort with interpolating the song Arirang into the opening cut, this like club song that opens the album. I mean, like, I don't know, this feels a bit like eating kimchi rice at a Paris baguette. Like they didn't like themselves to an extent that that form of cross-cultural sort of collaboration at that stage. But this underscores the fact that BTS is a big business. And the members are one thing, they're the driving force, you could say, but then there are many forces working around them as well. And so if this album Arirang has shortcomings, sometimes I think that they could be phrased as, they could be encapsulated by saying that maybe BTS themselves are not present enough in the album. Maybe there's too little BTS in this album, which I don't know how that's going to go down with the BTS army, but that seems to be, if there are dissatisfactions, that seems to be what it's about. But there are plenty of nods to their Korean heritage, their Korean background, Korean culture, if you know where to look. They're subtle, though. The question being, are they too subtle? Are they not subtle enough? Are they, I don't know. There's a line in the album, sung in English, of course. It says something like, people are going to hear the story they want to hear. And I think that's true of this debate as well. People, they listen to Arirang and they hear what they want to hear, for good or for ill.
Right. Well, regardless of the debate, there is much excitement for the BTS World Tour, as David was saying, among the fans, of course, worldwide. All right, I'll leave it at that. Colin, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
David, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you, Sunny.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching.